Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I just wanted to take some time and show you my illustration process today. I started this particular illustration. It's a piece for a dummy that I'm working on. I did a sketch in Procreate on my iPad Pro, and I also colored that sketch in digitally on the iPad before I actually transferred a really light drawing onto a piece of watercolor paper that I then stretched and started painting. And I just did this whole painting took several hours to make, and I just took a really quick speed painting about it, and I thought it would be fun to kind of talk at the same time while I'm painting and kind of explain what I'm doing with the whole process. I'm using there's a little tin on the top right, and that's just a tin I made myself. It's a combination of Windsor and Newton watercolors and some Daniel Smith watercolors. And then I also have a really old Yarka watercolor set that you can't see in the picture. So those are the watercolor brands that I'm using. And some of the teeny tiny little areas in the painting I've also masked out with the Schminke, what do you call that stuff? Well, the masking fluid that you put on and it dries up. And you can see that's that blue bottle that's sitting on the top left corner over there. And usually kind of the way that I start, you can see I'm actually rubbing some of the masking fluid off at this point. And so the way that I usually start my watercolors is I'll have my kind of faint line drawing underneath, and then I'll start and I paint kind of the broad areas in at first. And I like to kind of whatever pan of watercolor that I make, so like right now I'm doing the green, I like to, whatever I have green, like to paint all those greens first and maybe alternate the colors a little bit with a little bit of blue and a little bit of yellow, but keeping the basic color of the green the same. And then I start, you can see that I'm doing some of the other things, so I've got some blues and some yellows and some pinks, and wherever the pink goes I'm kind of doing everything with the pink, and then I'm doing everything with the blue. And this just seems to work well for me, and I often do kind of a lighter tone and then I go back and do a darker tone. And personally I particularly really like to draw a lot, so what I kind of prefer to do with these things is I usually do fairly light watercolors and I kind of make them into washes on the bottom, and then what I do is I'll go back at the end of this video or towards the end of this video and I go in with pencils and my coloring pencils, and I'll go in and add some textures and some line work and outlines with those, and I just really like the look of that, and that's kind of what I found works best for me personally. And so right now I'm just adding some details. It's a really fun dummy that I'm working on right now. It's the story about this little owl who wants to have a pet really bad, and she's not a very graceful owl, so she keeps losing her pets or squishing them, or something seems to happen to them and she just has a hard time finding the right one for herself. And I'll have hopefully another video. I made another illustration for the dummy, and hopefully I'll have that video up at some point too. It'll be a little bit of a close-up. And if you can see the brush size, I'm not using a particularly tiny brush. I kind of like using a bigger brush, and that way I can, it doesn't let me do a ton of detail, but I usually do the detail with the pencils and the colored pencils, and so I like with kind of a medium-sized brush to just kind of go in, and it's nice to do the feathers and it's nice to do leaves and things like that, and I can get it to a fairly tiny line if I need to. And so everything kind of has a base coat or a color right now, and I was using that early color kind of reference for myself. It's printed out on a piece of paper on the top. You can't really see it. And then I'll just go back in and add darker layers on layers before I start doing the drawing. And if you guys have, I'll try to put all the materials I was using in the comments below. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd love if you just write below, and I'll try to just reply back to you as the best as I can. And I don't know, if you like me commenting, I can try to comment on the other one too. Otherwise, I could just do some music for the next one. I don't know, if there's a lot of questions, then I might answer some of those questions next time too. And hopefully I'll be working on some prints in the near future too, and I'll make some videos about those as well. And now some of the really detailed parts, I'm starting to get the last little bits and pieces of the masking fluid off. And pretty soon we're going to start going into the pencil and the color pencil phase of this whole illustration. And for those, I usually I don't have a favorite pencil that I use. I just use whatever I find laying around, you know, closest to the table that I'm working on. And as far as color pencils, let's see, I think my brand is Faber-Castell. I actually had to go check. It's Derwent. Derwent color pencils, and I bought those when I still lived back home in Finland, and so I don't know if that's a brand that you can buy in Europe, but I'm sure, you know, any other brand of coloring pencil that you feel comfortable with would work just as well as what I'm using. And I'll write that brand down below too. I mean, these are pencils that I've got a really long time ago. I think probably when I was in high school, and I still have them because I usually end up, I've been doing printmaking for so long that they just don't get used as much. But recently I've started to put them into better use. Yeah, and basically kind of the way the process continues after I'm done with doing all the outlines. Sometimes I'll go back and, like over here, I'll add a little bit more watercolor to areas that I think need to be a little bit darker. And what I do is I finish the illustration the best I can just by doing it by hand, and then what I do is I have an Epson V500 scanner, which is just it's not a very expensive scanner, but it works really well, and I scan my illustrations in two parts and combine them in Photoshop. And then I do little tweaks. I'll maybe darken some areas, lighten some areas where I need highlights. And like with this illustration, there's a red line that kind of is a flight path of something ricocheting out the top doorway over there. And so I do that in Photoshop just to make sure that I get it right, because if my hand wiggles or the arc just isn't quite right, then it's easy to correct that in Photoshop, whereas if I do it in color pencil, then I can't really, it's going to be really hard to fix after it's done. And so you'll see that here in a minute once I show you the finished version on Photoshop. Oh, and currently I'm not using the latest edition of Photoshop. I'm just using Photoshop CS5, which is something I purchased a while ago. But I think I might be upgrading to the subscription-based one here sometime soon. But even the older versions work. Alright, so just a quick rundown of what happens next. And then here's just a close-up shot of what the final illustration looks like with the digitally added red line to it. And it has a little bit of a light highlight just so it kind of shows better, and that's the whole illustration as a whole. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you like it, please give me a thumbs up and come and see back for more.